This World Cup proves that anyone can be woke. Hey, Harriet, welcome back to this channel. Today is going to be another short episode where I cover a topic that I've been feeling really passionate about. And because yesterday was the final of the World Cup, I am so happy that Spain won. Even happier that Argentina lost. I'm going to use my background as a DEI expert to show what we can learn about the World Cup using the lens of DEI. As a recovering DEI expert, I want to explain how the World Cup proves that we are all a little bit woke when diversity benefits us personally. Those that are anti-woke will argue that DEI is a vehicle to promote underqualified people into undeserved spaces. I argue that DEI exists because it acknowledges that even excellence cannot excel within a rigged system. And in rigged systems, talent is easily overlooked, blocked, or judged by a different standard based on who possesses that talent. DEI actually works to address those barriers so that excellence actually has an opportunity to be recognized. When we look at the World Cup, which is the best of the best athletes in the world, we can easily see in this World Cup in particular how excellence was blocked, went unrewarded because it was so obvious that the system that FIFA had set up for this World Cup was obviously rigged toward one particular team and one particular player. And we saw that in the decisions that the referees made, the ways that the judging technology of VAR was used, and the goals and the penalties that were recognized and those that were not based on who executed them. One of the things that was so interesting about watching this World Cup was observing FIFA as a corporation similar to many of the corporations that I have consulted for. It was interesting to see the concerted effort from its leadership to thwart any opportunity that enhanced diversity might have on creating a more inclusive or equitable experience. When Trump came into office last January, a lot of corporations threw up their hands and said, we are getting rid of our DEI initiatives because we're not seeing a return on the investment of time, expertise, and money that we put into DEI over the last 3 to 5 years. What was really annoying for me hearing these statements was the lack of acknowledgement of all of the pushback and derailment that a lot of these corporations, C-suite and HR departments put into ensuring that the DEI initiatives their employees had put forth would actually never come to fruition. As someone who had worked intimately with a lot of employees internally who had spent so much time, so much effort, so much care to create a more inclusive environment within their offices, it was such a slap in the face to have those efforts be pathologized. A lot of these corporations did DEI incredibly performatively. And by that, I mean they focused on the D. And I don't mean that the way it maybe sounded. What I mean is that they focused on hiring more minoritized people exclusively, and I would argue they really just hired more Black people. They did absolutely nothing to integrate these new diverse hires into their corporate culture. They did not care about retention. They did not care about these employees' satisfaction and engagement. They liked the optics of a diversity report at the end of the year that showed that they had increased numbers around certain demographics. And when those employees didn't flourish within this new environment, they ostensibly blamed the employees. They argued that they had tried without acknowledging they did absolutely nothing to address microaggressive behaviors. They did nothing to address internal bias, especially within their leadership systems. And if anything, those corporate offices felt very much like a rigged system that these new diverse hires were set up to fail in. FIFA felt similarly to me this summer. In one hand, this World Cup felt more diverse than any before because more countries were allowed to play, resulting in many more teams from Africa. And so, for a lot of people watching the first round of matches, there was this hope and excitement because optically or visually, you could see more diversity on the pitch. However, as the tournament progressed, how rigged the system was became abundantly clear. It became obvious that FIFA had done nothing to address a lot of the internalized bias that made it easier for certain countries to advance. Even the inclusion of non-biased technology like VAR was used so sporadically and so advantageously for obvious agendas that it was not surprising that VAR did not make this World Cup feel more fair. Another way the diversity in this World Cup was mishandled is when we looked at the discussions around player demographics, specifically for predominantly white countries. So, for a lot of European countries, the players were very diverse. France was a perfect example of this. A majority of French players or recognized French players were Black. And the discussions around these players, especially by leaders of other countries like Paraguay, who argued that because these players were Black, they couldn't be European, spoke to an issue of conditional acceptance that is really hard to live and sometimes even harder to observe. And by that I mean, for a lot of the systems that we live within, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, there is this false belief that if you are a minority within those systems, but you work really, really hard and you capitalize on your innate talent and you put everything into what you do, that you can win within those systems. We watch firsthand how untrue that was within the World Cup. For a lot of those minoritized players, when they were winning, when they were up, they were celebrated. Celebrated by people in their own countries that probably the next day argued why they didn't deserve to be in that country. But when they lost, their nationalism came into question very conveniently. One of my favorite World Cup players is a French player named Ozil. And he has a famous quote where he said, "When I was winning, I was French. When I was losing, I was an immigrant." To my point about the World Cup made everyone a little bit woke, it was interesting to me to watch a lot of people who are anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalism, anti-diversity cheer on and celebrate members of their team that they wouldn't want to be members of society. Trump reversing the Nigerian American player Balogun's red card a week after arguing that someone like Balogun shouldn't even be considered a citizen of the US. That level of hypocrisy was so apparent within this World Cup and also incredibly devastating to witness. This idea that anti-woke people were supporting diverse players because it directly benefited them personally, maybe financially through betting, definitely socially. To see a lot of people's innate racism, xenophobia, bigotry take a seat behind their desire to support a winning team highlighted the hypocrisy of so many people that have those right wing views. I related so much to so many of those diverse players who had given this World Cup their all, their best, their everything, and still realizing that the system was rigged so that the teams that typically succeed within the World Cup, who are predominantly white, still advanced, even in the face of the fact that they weren't better. That level of knowing that you've worked your hardest and it will still never be enough. It was a hard pill to swallow. And it was interesting to observe people who don't usually have that feeling experience that feeling on such a visceral level for the first time. I think our ability to enjoy this World Cup, even in the face of so many unfair practices, speaks to how normalized pushing through rigged systems is for so many of us, surviving them, figuring out your own standard of thriving within them. As sad as that fact might be, I am appreciative that we were all still able to really enjoy the World Cup, even if it was through our shared hate of FIFA, Messi, Argentina. I'm glad that we were still able to come together and have the experience that the World Cup offers every 4 years. And I am hopeful. I am hopeful because when we look at the leaders of the future of the World Cup, they are diverse. They are Bellingham, they are Mbappe, they are Olise, they are Lamine Yamal. Those are the future of the World Cup. And even for the players that look like the current standard, like Holland from Norway, many of them are as committed to diversity and multiculturalism and inclusion and equity in ways that I know are going to shape the direction of where the World Cup is going. I think one of the benefits of this World Cup happening in the US is that Americans are noxiously loud about the things that we don't like. And so the conversations around rigging, the conversations around racism, the conversations around inequity within FIFA and the World Cup were as prominent as the celebrations around the wins. Those discussions aren't going away and not as easily ignored as they have been in the past. And so I leave this World Cup celebrating the experience and so hopeful for its future. And I'm also side eyeing a month from now when someone tweets anti woke sentiment, knowing for 5 weeks this summer they were as woke as I was. I can go to bed sleeping easy about that. I hope you enjoyed the World Cup. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you are now contemplating a deeper, different understanding of how the World Cup is a microcosm for our globe. And I hope you feel hopeful. Hopeful because Lamine Yamal's little brother won. And hopeful that we will look back on this World Cup and see it as a turning point of what this tournament can be on a global level for all of us.